Recently, the Republic of Moldova became an official candidate for membership in the European Union. What should citizens of Moldova know about this status and how this change will influence us?
That's a very good question. I think that Moldova's choice to take the European path is a very wise one, because it is a great opportunity to do what the government has set out to do, improving the democracy, improving the respect for human rights, and growing the economy to the benefit of all people. Moldova has now formally received the status of candidate member, and that means that we can think about all the steps that need to be taken to become a full member. And that's a lot of steps, because there is something that we call the acquis, which are all the rules and regulations that all the EU members have agreed between themselves to make sure that there is a common market, but there is also a common space of shared values where all the rules apply equally. And Moldova has to be brought to that same level so that we can be sure that those rules also apply within this country. It will take many years, I think, but I think the prospect of EU membership is, it's a great incentive to do those changes that the government already set out to do. A lot of work has been done, but there's also a lot of work that remains. Fighting corruption, improving the quality of the institutions, and certainly improving the economy.
You are a veteran country in the EU.
Right, founding member.
Yeah. What advice can you give us as a new, freshly just candidate country?
I think the advice would be to look at other countries that have gone through the same process. But they can also be countries that recently joined. The Netherlands joined a long time ago. It was one of the founding members in very different circumstances. Europe was recently recovering from the Second World War. Now that is some time ago, right? Other things have happened, including the collapse of communism, the fall of the Berlin Wall. New countries were created that are still wrestling to some extent with their institutions. Like Moldova, institutions are not very old, they're not always very strong. There is still a discussion about what is our national identity as Moldovans. I would look at other countries who have recently joined the European Union, like the Baltic states, for example, and learn from their experiences. I think that is very interesting.
Moldova is facing lots of issues and also bureaucracy when it comes to reforms. What role do the Netherlands and the European Union as well play in this process, in implementing key reforms in Moldova?
We support the reform agenda of the cabinet of Natalia Gabrielița, but of course we cannot do everything. The European Commission is an important donor, other bilateral donors are there, so we had to focus. One of the things that we are focusing on in the short term is the justice sector reform. We support now the pre-vetting of the candidates for the Supreme Council of Magistracy and Supreme Council of Prosecutors, but we will also support the eventual vetting. The vetting of all the sitting judges and prosecutors to make sure that we can clean the justice system, which is something that is very important and something that's a priority for this government. It's not the only thing we do. We also support the government to design and implement a strategy on energy security to make sure that Moldova gets more energy independent, that it develops renewable energy sources, but also that it uses the energy more wisely, more efficiently, so energy efficiency. So we're also helping with that. And then obviously we want to help the economy grow by attracting the interest of Dutch companies, Dutch investors who want to invest here or to do business.
Some of our government's goals are to fight corruption. Current government's goal is to fight corruption and implement the justice reform.
Yeah.
Do you think they did well on this matter in the last year?
It's very difficult to tell because we only just begun, right? The pre-vetting is now underway. The commission was formed, the secretariat is ready, and in August I am informed the real pre-vetting, it's actually a screening of candidates for the Supreme Councils of Magistracy and prosecutors will start. I followed this closely. It is well set up, it is well thought out, but it yet still has to deliver the results because it hasn't started yet. Let alone the real vetting that will take maybe 3 or 4 years. That it's now being debated. What should that law look like, the law on vetting, for all the prosecutors and judges in the country. And the idea is, of course, that the ones that cannot demonstrate that they are integer have to leave the system. In general, we don't see so much funny stuff with weird verdicts or cozy relationship between certain oligarchs and certain judges or prosecutors. So we don't have that history. So it is very difficult to advise you precisely on that. But what I can say, and what I think is a lesson for Moldova, is invest in the permanent education of your judges and prosecutors. It's very important.
To what extent do the conflict and relations with Transnistrian region affects our efforts to join the EU?
Well, it's difficult to answer that question, right? With or without the EU accession trajectory, the conflict needs to be solved in a peaceful manner. This is in the interest of the people who live on the right bank, and this is the interest of the people who live on the left bank. I think it is important that Chișinău and Tiraspol remain in contact, and that we continue to look for ways to improve the life of people, both on the left bank and the right bank, that we promote business. As you have noticed, probably most of the experts from Transnistria go to the European Union. So Transnistria is profiting a lot from the deep and comprehensive free trade agreement with the EU. So Tiraspol has a lot to win by this further economic integration into the European Union. I think that is clear. I think Tiraspol, the leadership, the so-called leadership, understands that. One
of the matters that Ziarul de Gardă also has been writing about for almost 2 decades is human rights. We know that the Dutch embassy has implemented multiple projects and awards on this topic. What European or Dutch practices can we deploy in our country to ensure human rights are respected?
I think Moldova has come a long way in, improving its human rights record. If you look at the laws, Moldova is doing actually pretty good. But of course, it's the implementation where things can be improved further. Thankfully, we have a vibrant civil society here in Moldova that researches the violations of human rights and that draws the attention of the government to that. And I think certainly with the current government, there is a political will to improve the human rights record of the country. But sometimes the institutions are not strong enough or they don't have the capacity. So therefore, we are very glad that Moldova has adopted the Istanbul Convention that has all the tools, all the provisions how to improve on this. But then you still have to do it. And that means that you need more capacities for full implementation, to make sure the police can do what they need to do, to make sure that the judges and prosecutors can do what they need to do. Also to work on prevention, by the way. It's not only working on, investigation and prosecution. But Moldova, I think, needs some help, and we stand ready, together with other donors such as Sweden, to help with, and UN Women, not to forget, with the full implementation of this. It's just an example, but there are other examples as well, of course. I think the protection of the human rights of LGBTI can be improved in Moldova, for example.
Because of different problems, starting from financial problems and going through social and so on, many Moldovans, especially youth, still migrate exclusively and for the more part in the European Union.
Yeah.
How can we tackle this problem? How can we, I don't know, tell them stay here, we can work together, and how can we do this?
It's a very difficult question. It's difficult how to do it, but I also find it a little bit difficult to ask this from people, right? I mean, I very much believe that the individual is free to move. So if an individual Moldovan wants to study in the Netherlands, work in the Netherlands, I think it's perfectly fine. But of course, for a Moldovan society, it's a big problem that hundreds of thousands of young people leave and don't come back. We have to think about that. And I think the abstract long-term answer is, if the situation in Moldova improves with the reforms, more democracy, better governance, better respect for human rights, more economic growth, then Moldova in itself will become a more attractive place to live and people will come back. We started a small activity this year, which we call Moldova Brain Game, and it is targeted at young Moldovans who study in the Netherlands, who have recently graduated from a Dutch university, and we offer them an internship in Moldova for the summer period, so they can have this working experience working for a Moldovan NGO. Our NGO partners volunteer to participate in this project, and then they can feel what it is like to work in a Moldovan working environment, and maybe shed some of the prejudice that they may have had about working in Moldova. It's the first time that we are rolling out this project. It will run this summer, and we are happy to see the results and to evaluate it. And if it's a success, we will scale it up next year, and maybe we can invite the government to also make available some positions for interns in some private companies and grow it a little bit.
So the future is bright.
I think the future is bright. I think we have a duty to be optimists. But it's going to be a long journey, of course, and there will be setbacks. We are living difficult times with the war of aggression, the Russian war of aggression going on in Ukraine. That is obviously making it much more difficult for this government to deliver on the agenda of reforms that got a strong mandate of the Moldovan people in the last elections.
What should we do next, and how can we plan and become more close to European Union?
What I think is important is to not give up. I mean, I know it's easy to be cynical and say, yeah, and the economy is not growing fast enough, and now the inflation is high, and when will this all end? I mean, I think it is very clear that Moldova's future is in Europe, and that, I think many Moldovans will have to go through some hardship before it gets better, and before Moldova is having the full benefits from EU membership. But with the eyes on the ball, it's important, and I would encourage especially young people who are living in diaspora to consider how they can contribute to building up their country.